Welcome, and thank you for joining our webinar today, DR Preparedness through Orchestration and Automation. We have a guest joining us today that will help us cover this topic. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us. Before we begin, I want to let you know we'll have a few minutes for Q&A at the end. So please feel free to submit questions as we move along, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. My name is Jeremiah Cohen. I am with Simpatico Systems. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer with Simpatico Systems. I handle all things cybersecurity for our company, for our customers. Been in IT for a little over 18 years. Most of that's been in IT consulting, cybersecurity consulting. As you can see, I have kind of the alphabet soup of security certifications there, CISSP, CISO, CEH, etc., and as well as some Microsoft certifications. Also joining me today is Corey Ruthart.
Thanks, Jeremiah. Yeah, so Corey Ruthart, I've been with Simpatico Systems for about 7 years. Been in the industry for a similar time frame as Jeremiah, about 18 years. In my role as CIO for Simpatico Systems, I work on everything operational for not only Simpatico internally, but for our customers as well. So we've got a little over 600 customers over 13 states doing everything from desktop to help desk. And we spend a lot of time planning with our customers what we're talking about today with disaster recovery and really trying to make sure that we have good business continuity. With us today is Chris Bain from Infrascale.
Hey, thanks for the introduction. So, yep, I'm the Chief Solutions Architect here at Infrascale. I've been doing disaster recovery, replication, failover for 20 plus years. I've been here at Infrascale for a little over 2 years now. I actually was in New York for 9/11 and helped 2 major companies recover from major data center losses. So not only have I talked about disaster recovery, I've been through disaster recovery. And, I'm hoping to bring that experience here to explain to you guys why I love Infrascale's solution and why I think it's one of the best ones in the market.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I appreciate your service and our time of need with the country for sure. Every little bit helps for sure. So want to cover some of our topics for today. So a couple of the pieces we're going to cover, just discussing a little bit about data backup versus disaster recovery, and then we'll get into Infrascale's presentation and let Chris walk us through that. So some of the statistics around this come from various sources, but I thought it was pertinent information I just wanted to share in preparation for what we're going to talk about. So as you can see here, 40 to 60% of small businesses who lose access to operational systems, their core infrastructure and data without a DR plan close their doors forever. I mean, that's a pretty staggering number. 93% of companies without disaster recovery who suffer a major data disaster are out of business within a year. Again, another staggering statistic. 96% of companies with a trusted backup and a disaster recovery plan were able to survive a ransomware attack. But that's optimistic. You hear about that happening all the time. That's on the positive note here. On average, businesses lose over $100,000 per ransomware incident due to downtime and that recovery piece. And so, this a statistic that came from CNN, and some of the percentages that make up these disasters that we're talking about, you never know what they're going to be. Hardware failure is number one at 45%. That's of total unplanned downtime. Followed by the loss of power, 35%. Right? You never know. You've got backup battery, but that only goes so long. Some places have generators, but that's 35%. Software failure, we're talking about the Windows operating systems. Maybe it's an update issue, something that takes down maybe a patch to your proprietary software, taking you out of business. Data corruption is 24% considered disaster, where you're having to do an entire recovery of your system. External security breaches starting to increase 23% from a security breach perspective. And then just accidental user error, right? Somebody clicking something, I didn't mean to do that, I accidentally deleted, accidentally tripped over the plug, accounts for 20%. So as you can see, that's much more than 100%. These percentages are not a cumulative percentage of overall. It's the percentage out of 100 what we're looking at. So 45% of the time it's due to hardware failure, and then there's other percentages of out of 100 that account for those other pieces. So when we talk about, disaster recovery, backup, there's really an important distinction between backup and disaster recovery. So, backup is really the process of making an extra copy, right? It's backing up a copy of something or making multiple copies of data, and you back up data to protect it. And so really that's a tool, right? You have a backup tool to back up data. And so you might need to restore backup data if you encounter like accidental deletions or some sort of database corruption, problems with software upgrades or Windows updates, for example. And disaster recovery, on the other hand, really refers to the plan and the processes that are established for regaining access to applications and data and IT resources after some sort of outage or some sort of event. So now that plan might involve switching over to redundant sets of servers or storage systems until those primary data center that primary data center is functional again, or your core operations. So some organizations make mistake backup for disaster recovery. I have a backup, I'm good to go. So, but simply having copies of data doesn't mean that you can actually keep your business running. So yes, you have a copy of it, it's great, you've got it in storage, but the functional part of your environment, the core operations need to keep running, and having that backup isn't going to keep that running. So to ensure business continuity, you really need a robust, like proven, tested disaster recovery plan. And understanding the essentials of backup and disaster recovery is really a critical aspect for minimizing the impact of unplanned downtime of your business. So you have to have a plan. Corey, when we talk about backup and disaster recovery, there are two key terms that drive some of the business decision around investment that the investment that companies make in their backup DR solutions. Obviously the value of data being number one, right? We got to put value on our data, but I'm talking about recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference of these two and why they're important?
Absolutely. When we're talking about this disaster recovery time objective and point objective are key to that discussion. And we really talk a lot about that internally and with our customers relating to overall business goals and objectives. So recovery time objective, for instance, is the amount of time it actually takes you to recover from some type of an outage, whether that's a power outage, it could be a hardware failure, a server goes down, it could be environmental failure or something that takes an entire company or office offline. But really with that recovery time objective, we want to consider how much time the business is actually willing to lose and what impact that's going to have on your bottom line. It's going to vary quite a bit from business to business. So depending on what type of industry or what type of business it is, for some industries, it's going to be really critical that those are up and running in a matter of minutes. Some businesses, it can be a couple of days before it becomes a critical issue for them. So that time is a very big component of what we're talking about. The other side of that, the recovery point objective, is the amount of data that you're willing to lose. So we look at that from that backup frequency, and that's where backup and disaster recovery really start to come together. If I'm going to take snapshots of my data every hour or 4 hours or maybe once a day, the difference in that frequency that I'm taking those backups, that's really going to be that recovery point objective. So again, if my business is more transactional, I might want to take recovery points much more frequently. So if I'm an online business and I have a lot of consumer transactions that are happening frequently, I want to make sure I'm taking snapshots really soon based on when those transactions are happening, so that if I do have to roll back in the event of some kind of a disaster, I'm not losing all of the transactions between when my last backup was and when the event occurred. So those are two of the really big constraints that we're talking about when we talk about backups and disaster recovery.
Thanks, Corey. Really, that's really good information. It's pertinent, right? What we're talking about. It's part of that plan when we have to account for these timeframes. So it's really important. So a solution that has made its way into the hearts of, I'm sure, many of those who are responsible for ensuring the backup of their company's data and the business continuity aspect in the event of disaster recovery is what's known as disaster recovery as a service. Corey, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so disaster recovery as a service is something that I absolutely love. When we talk about that, we're really talking about taking a managed services type of approach to that disaster recovery planning. So you're using a third party to host and manage that infrastructure instead of having a company maintain multiple data centers, having, we used to call them hot sites and cold sites and warm sites. Instead of having all these different sets of infrastructure that you have to maintain as a company, now you actually farm that out to another provider like Infrascale, and they maintain all of that infrastructure for you. So you use the software to maintain all of your backups and have good copies of all of your data based on those RTOs and RPOs that we talked about. But then being able to actually spin that up in their data center takes all of that cost and burden off of the company. So you're not having to share all those costs all the time. And it allows you to have a lot of scalability and to be able to have some redundancy. I know there's a couple of different instances where, and maybe Infrascale is going to talk about this, but there's a couple of instances where there's been some natural disasters, hurricanes or tornadoes or things like that, where entire sections of a country or area are wiped out. And really, it's ineffective. Even if you had multiple buildings in the same city, that really wouldn't fit the bill. You would still have a disaster you couldn't recover from. And so in those events, having a disaster recovery as a service plan where you're having a third party provider to help fulfill that need for you really gives you some pretty good leverage that I think would be out of reach for most companies.
Agreed. Thank you, Corey. I mean, that's really pertinent to, and a good segue into what we're talking here. I mean, let's go ahead and bring in our guest. Here today from Infrascale, we have Chris Bain, the Chief Solutions Architect. Chris is going to show us why Infrascale and Simpatico provide you with a DR solution you can count on when you need to recover. Chris?
Thank you for that info, or that intro. All right. So Infrascale offers two different solutions when we're talking about disaster recovery. One of them is our Infrascale Disaster Recovery Local, and then we also offer Infrascale Disaster Recovery Cloud. Now, what are the differences between the two? Well, both of them are going to let you boot up locally. Both are going to protect all your Windows and Unix and Linux servers. The main difference that you're going to get between the two is with the cloud offering, we're going to allow you to boot things up in the cloud, and we're going to give you access to orchestration. Now, we're going to go in depth in a second into orchestration, so I'll wait until we get to that point to talk about that. Now, why would we go with Infrascale solution? Well, we've got some great technology that's actually patented for us. So we have our deduplicated file system, and then we actually use our deduplicated file system for our replication. What does that bring to you? Well, we're very efficient on the way that we store our data on the appliance. We only have to store each unique block one time. Now, what's awesome about that is, again, we use that for our replication. We're very efficient on the amount of data that we replicate up to the cloud. So once you've initially seeded that data to the cloud, there's very little updates that need to be sent. Now, I work with a lot of people with limited bandwidth, and I've yet to have a situation where we've had to reseed an environment or start over from scratch. Another thing that's really nice about our solution is the fact that we can do fulls and incrementals, and you can start doing incrementals forever. And we don't have some kind of chain that can break where you lose all your backups because one of those isn't, a successful backup. Each one is independent, and each one is an independent restore point. With that being said, when we talk about booting on top of the appliance, you can boot from any of those without any performance issues. A lot of other people in the industry, that most recent one is fully ready to boot up. With us, any point in time, you can boot it up. There's no performance impact. Now, I want to kind of go over a little bit about what an environment looks like, right? So here we've got our local environment where we've got physical and virtual servers and workstations. We can spin stuff up locally. So kind of think of it as DVRing your failure. So if you have a server come down, boot it up on our appliance within seconds, and you're up and running. And then later, figure out what happened, do that postmortem, and then restore back into your production environment. Now, with that being said, we do provide push button failover from your local environment into the Infrascale cloud. Now, let's quickly take a look at what it looks like to set up one of these appliances. So here we're going to log into the Infrascale dashboard. we're going to go up and we're going to go to Manage, and we're going to say DR Sites and Computers. Now it's going to show us all of those appliances that we've got. So for this particular one, we're going to go in and we're going to manage that bottom appliance. It's a brand new one to this environment. There's nothing configured on it right now. So as it logs in, we're going to see that the only thing that's configured is to back up myself. So it's just currently backing up itself. Now to set up clients, and a client is anything that we're backing up or protecting, we're going to go up to the Clients tab, and we're going to go ahead and go to VMware, and we're going to say we want to add a connection. Here we're going to go ahead and connect out to our VMware machine. So this can be an ESX host or a vCenter host. We're going to put in our credentials. And now we've got an important decision to make. Do we want to back up all of the machines that are out there? Do we want to back up machines that are added automatically? Or do we want to go and pick and choose? I'm going to go pick and choose what I want to back up. Now here we can see it's connected. It's brought in all those servers for us. Of course, what do I want to back up? The most important server ever. That's very important to back up. And then we'll also grab a 2012 server, and we'll grab a Windows 10 client. So I highlight them all, and then I just say I want to register them. Registering basically means we're going to assign them to a backup policy or a client schedule, and we're going to start protecting those machines. What does that mean? Well, if we go up to settings, we can actually take a look at our job schedules. So as we were talking about earlier with our recovery point, this is where we're going to set that. So right now, by default, it's set to do a full on the weekends and incrementals throughout the week. Now, if we click new there, we can add in more points in time. Say you wanted to do every 4 hours, 8 hours, hour. You could add that in here. So you could bring that down to as little amount of time as you want. Now, with that being said, that's only kind of half of the equation that we've got, right? The other half of the equation is how long do we want to keep this data? So here we can look at our default retention policies. Now, all of these can be edited at the client level also, but here we can see for our virtual backups, we're doing what traditionally was called the grandfather, father, son rotation. We're going to keep all backups for 7 days, and the last backup of the day for so many weeks, and the last backup of the week for so many months, and the last backup of the month for so many years. Now, I want to show you guys how easy it is to enable replication, but in order to replicate data, we need something to replicate. So we'll come in here and we'll back this Windows machine up real quick. Now, I do like to point out any time where I've edited stuff for time. So right here, I did edit this for time. I think this backup took about 4 minutes, but I sped it up because we're in IT. We've all spent enough of our lives watching progress bars. We don't need to sit here and watch some more progress bars. So our backup is now done. If we jump over to the replication tab, I haven't gotten there yet. We're going to be able to turn on the replication. Now, what the replication is going to allow us to do is take all that data from on-site to our remote site. Now, again, whether we're using cloud or local, we're still going to replicate that data off-site. Now, I've clicked cloud. I've clicked continue now. And what it's going to do is it's going to go out and it's going to find its partner in the cloud. It's literally that easy to turn on replication. So right now, we got our green checkbox. We're ready to go. If we come up here and we click on the status, we're going to see that replication is now enabled. It's going to start moving that data over from the primary to the secondary. First, it's going to do a little check right now because we just turned it on to see, all right, well, what's here and not there, and what do we need to send up to the cloud? Again, we do have the ability to seed this data. So say you've got a couple terabytes and you don't want to send that across your network, you can definitely hook up a device locally to that appliance, push all the data onto that device, and then ship it out to us, and we'll be able to load that on the cloud side so you don't have to replicate those terabytes of data across the network. Now, I do have a 4 terabyte environment myself, and it took about 5 days on my cable modem to replicate it from my house up to the InfraScale cloud. Now, the last thing I do want to show you, I really like this feature, is when you set up these backups, we do have the ability to do boot verification. So here we can see that backup finished, then it booted it on this appliance and shows us a login screen. So we know not only did the backup successfully finish, and we told you that, here we're showing you visual verification that that backup was successful. Now, that being said, that's how we set up that appliance and we do local protection. What is orchestration? We brought it up earlier. Let's go ahead and take a look at configuring orchestration. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and log into the dashboard as we did before. But this time, instead of going to DR sites and appliances and going to the appliance we want and saying local, we're going to go up to the cloud. Now, why do we do orchestration in the cloud and not locally? Well, locally, you're going to boot a machine if something gets a failed patch or something gets corrupted, or we have some kind of issue like that. Where when we're booting in the cloud, we're going to be booting a group of machines. So we go over to the orchestration tab, and this allows us to configure how we need all those machines to boot up. So first, we're going to drag over our Active Directory machine. And then we're going to wait, 2 minutes for that machine to come online. Then maybe we're going to do a group of machines. Next, we need our database servers, right? Those need to come online. So we're going to grab an Oracle server. We'll grab a SQL server. And that's going to make sure that those boot up together. Then we're going to add in our web server, maybe some test clients. And now we have our orchestration configured. So we now have a predictable method of booting everything up. Now, what about our disaster recovery LAN? Well, right here, we can see we can configure that. So if you want to make your disaster recovery LAN, the default, which is 100.x, you can do that. Or you could go in and actually configure it to be the same as your on-prem. Now that we've configured our orchestration, let's look at what an actual disaster would look like, right? We want to pre-configure all this. We want to pre-configure those VPNs, whether they're site-to-site or they're software-based. So again, we get an alert, our site's down. We go ahead and log into this machine, manage DR sites and appliances. We're going to log in again to the cloud side. Now we're going to go up to the boot tab, and we're going to look at what's active. Just because I want to show you it's not smoke and mirrors. There's nothing active. So now we go to the orchestration tab, and all we do, we push play. Run. And now when we go over to the active tab, we can see there's all 6 of our machines getting ready to boot up, and it's going to boot them in that order that we told it to. Now, like I said, I like to be honest. I did speed this up. We added about 4 minutes of wait time in here. Again, don't like watching progress bars. This entire boot process took about 9 minutes. So from start to finish to bring all of these online. And again, that's with 4 minutes of wait time in there. So we can see here we've got our AD server, we've got our SQL server, our Oracle server, our web server, our Windows servers. All those are going to come up and come online and get booted for us. Now, what's great is if we're doing a DR LAN and we don't flip over the site-to-site VPN, you can log in and do these DR tests as much as you want to. So when your bosses say, hey, do we have a DR plan? Yes. Does it work? I don't know. Well, with our solution, you can say, yeah, we just tested it. And you can test it quarterly, yearly, monthly, whatever you guys want to be able to do to test out to make sure that your disaster recovery plan is up and ready to go. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to our Simpatico team.
Fantastic, Chris. Thank you for that presentation. I mean, that was good information, the visualization of seeing how easy it is. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, this was really good information, very pertinent information. You never know what a disaster is going to be, right? We all think of the tornadoes or the earthquakes or some natural disaster being the case, but we've all learned with this COVID thing that something like that could actually put you in a scenario where you're having to restore your business in kind of a disaster recovery type scenario, or outside of your environment, like almost simulating the fact that you couldn't be in your building. this is where that kind of stuff comes into play. And speaking with the Infrascale, they've actually had to help some customers do that. They weren't prepared. Their infrastructure wasn't up to par to be able to support that remote infrastructure in that facet. And they were actually rolling over into that DR and performing this orchestration capability. So it's very pertinent. You never know. Appreciate everybody being here. We're going to go ahead and go into some questions and answers. Yeah, unmute yourself there, Chris.
I did jump back in.
Awesome, thank you. Sorry about that. So I was about to field a question for you on your behalf, but we got Bill's asking, how often can I test this failover orchestration?
So that's actually one of the great things about our solution is we don't charge for doing multiple testings of the solution. So you can test it as much as you want. With that being said, the goal of our solution is not to migrate you to the Infrascale cloud forever. So, you know, you can definitely boot up and do as many tests as you want. We don't have some limit. We don't start charging. But if you do fail over into the cloud and are running in the cloud, we don't intend on you being there forever. You know, as long as it's within reason, you're trying to get your primary back up and running, we're good to go.
Awesome. So it sounds like from a testing perspective, you know, the people that are responsible for, you know, when we talk about have you tested that failover and that orchestration, this is a perfect opportunity to do that. So, okay. Another question here. Looks like Sandy's asking, are the encrypted tunnels set up ahead of time so that the access to the failover data is faster?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something that we do with our implementation.
Oh, looks like you got muted there.
Oh, sorry. Hopefully that unmuted me. So yeah, all of that set up ahead of time so that we have, you know, all the VPNs, whether it's site to site or software-based VPN, are set up and tested by the implementation team before the disaster. That way, when things happen, you don't really have to worry about configuring all that. You can just turn it all on and you're ready to go.
Okay, fantastic. And then another question here, and I think you did allude to it a little bit in some of the conversation there, but someone is asking specifically, what operating systems and hypervisors do you support? So I guess from that virtual platform perspective as well.
Okay, so we support Nutanix and Hyper-V. With those, we do use an agent. And then with VMware, we actually have integration with VMware where we don't need to use an agent of any kind. We can just connect to the VMware machine and use VMware's, you know, APIs for doing their backups and recoveries and all that.
Okay, fantastic. So across the board, we're good to go here.
And also public cloud. So
okay.
we support the public cloud.
Oh, great. Okay. Looks like we have another question here. Looks like maybe something we could field on our side. Corey, did you want to take this question, or do you want me to take it?
Sure. Yeah. Definitely.
So someone in the crowd is asking, what is the biggest difference between backing things up to a hard drive, which everybody's familiar with doing, and then having a full image?
Yeah, I think, when people say they're backing up to a hard drive, most of the time they're talking about a file level backup. And that's actually taking, the Word documents, the spreadsheets, those types of things that are on your computer and putting them on some type of a storage device, maybe a USB drive or some kind of external hard drive. And that's really different. When we do that, being a security guy myself, that really kind of worries me. When I take those files, put them on a USB, I'm not protecting those. If I lose that USB, anybody that finds it has access to that data. And it's not really a great way to back that up because that data is limited to just where I can take that USB drive. But when I do something with like having a full image, now I can actually restore everything on that computer, not just the backup of those couple of files. And when you're doing something with disaster recovery as a service through someone like Infrascale, you can do both. You can do file level backup into the cloud, or you can do full image-based backup. But the great thing is that it encrypts all of that information. So from the time it leaves your computer, those files, it's encrypted. It's something that even if someone was able to get to that information in the cloud, they can't do anything with it because they don't actually have
the key to see what that data really is. I hope that answers the question between hard drive and image-based backup.
Yeah, I definitely think that then and then some. I think when we're talking about all of this, we're really getting to the root of business continuity, right? That's the whole idea, is how do we ensure the business keeps running, and it's important to differentiate those backup types of essentially what the outcome is going to be. Some are less expensive, some, and it really isn't about the cost. It's what is the outcome, and again, business continuity being front of mind. It's really key that you have a plan, a disaster recovery plan, a tool, a solution, all of the pieces combined that are going to give you that outcome you're looking for. So, okay, I don't see any other questions here. Again, I want to thank everyone. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time with us. Really appreciate having you here. It was valuable information for us and for our audience. Corey, thank you so much for attending as always. Appreciate the insight, and for our audience for joining today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeremiah.